Today, me and Tuck are going to sift through bag soils and find out which ones are the best quality and which ones are just filling space. Let's go! I was over at Lowe's the other day and there are so many different options for soil. Different kinds, different brands, different formulations. It all can be a bit overwhelming. Having options is great, but choosing the right option can be a bit difficult without having a little bit of understanding of soil and without allowing ourselves to get a hands-on feel of the soil. While at Lowe's, I picked up about every kind of garden soil they had. Well, basically everything they had that pertains to gardening that's in a bag. I also laid it out right here so we can get a closer look at what we're going to be digging our hands into. I grabbed everything from potting mix to raised bed mix, garden soil, topsoil, compost, a dog, right boy? And a few additional amendments that I have. If you take a step back, you'll notice I have all of them laid out here so we can go through them and get a more detailed look at all of them as we kind of move along. Let's start out with potting mix so we can understand what we're paying for, because potting mix is the most expensive soil, but it's not even actually soil. Like the name implies, potting mix is designed for growing in pots. It's for container gardening. It's lightweight, it drains well, and it's rich in organic matter, which provides optimal conditions for growing plants in containers. Potting mix, like I have right here, this whole row, they're all different potting mixes. They're not actually soil because they don't contain any topsoil like we have right here. Potting mix is just a mixture of inorganic and organic materials. Most potting mixes consist of peat moss, compost, perlite, and then some woody species, either pine bark and or shredded hardwood mulch. The main difference between potting mix and your other garden soils is the addition of topsoil right here. We will find out as we go along that the more expensive a soil is, the more peat moss it usually contains, and the cheaper a soil is, typically the more topsoil it contains. While I was at Lowe's, I grabbed a number of different potting mixes. I also went to a different location and grabbed this potting mix, which is my favorite kind. We'll go into detail about all the different kinds of potting mix, and I'll also go into detail about the difference between the potting mix that I make and the potting mixes you can get in the store. But before we do that, let's get into a little bit more about some of the other soils that we grabbed. Me and Tuck wanted to mention before we move on that on our website we're having a massive President's Day sale where it's buy one raised bed, get the next item 20% off. So you could buy a raised bed and get a cover 20% off, or you could just get a raised bed and then another raised bed for 20% off. It's a limited time thing, so check it out while you can at teamgrow.us. And don't forget to spam some hearts down low for the little boss. We're getting some fresh wood chips down, so it's a little hard for this guy to walk on them. He's still out here, he's still working hard, he never quits, so that's why he's the leader of the whole garden and the channel. So don't forget to show some love to the little boss. Now that we understand what potting mix is, let's get into some soil basics, and we'll get into some of the major components that go into the soil mixes so we know what kind of soil we should be using. First up is the cheapest kind of soil. This is also the soil that contains the least amount of peat moss. We're talking about topsoil. Topsoil is a soil that's been collected from the Earth's surface from a depth of about 2 to 8 inches. It's processed for gardening, and it's essentially a filler soil. Basic topsoil, like we have right here, is mainly clay and sand. It doesn't contain much nutrition, but it can contain some organic matter, like we have right here, some sticks. As you'll notice, this is basically just shredded hardwood. When filling a raised bed, you could use some topsoil if you want, because it's cheap and it can act as a kind of filler. You could even go on your own property and harvest some of your own topsoil. Just make sure that your own soil doesn't have any soil-borne diseases in it. When it comes down to it though, topsoil is super dense, so it's not something you would want to fill your whole raised bed with, or your plants will struggle. Right next to me here, this is a premium, a little more expensive topsoil. And you'll find that topsoil is one of the main components to your soil mixes. Like, come over here. Topsoil is one of the main components in something like your garden soil and your raised bed soil. Usually the cheaper the mix, the more topsoil and the more woody products, and the less peat moss is going to be in it. So your potting mix, you won't find any topsoil in there because topsoil makes the soil like too dense. The next major component to a lot of soil mixes is compost. Compost is derived from decomposed organic matter. It's a nutrient-rich soil amendment, and it's one of the major components for all healthy soils. Compost improves soil structure, it enhances moisture retention, and promotes beneficial microbial activity, as well as providing nutrition. There are a number of different kinds of compost. Like this one right here is a mushroom compost. We also have manure composts, like back here. And also vermicompost, which is from earthworm castings. There's also leaf compost. So there are a number of different kinds of compost. Most soil mixes contain these two components of topsoil and compost. Some people like to even fill their raised bed with 50% compost, 50% topsoil. That's not something I would do. In my opinion, that's just way too dense. But if you do want to do that to fill your raised bed on the cheap, then I would suggest that you at least add in some peat moss and or some coco coir to lighten up your mix. Now that we're on the subject, let's talk a little bit about coco coir and peat moss. So like I mentioned earlier, the more peat moss or coco coir that bagged soil has in it, usually the more expensive it is. That's why the potting mix is the most expensive, because it has the highest level of peat moss. So peat moss and coco coir, they work in similar ways and similar fashions. They lighten up your soil, they reduce compaction, they enhance the drainage, and they add organic matter. So both are good options. I highly prefer coco coir. I think it's just amazing, and I'll get it in these bricks, just like this. I'm actually selling them on my website right now. So this is my favorite kind of medium, and it just enhances the level of your soil so much, and that's what makes the potting mix expensive, like I mentioned. But it's much cheaper if you buy your own coco coir or you buy your own peat moss, like in here, and then add it to your soils yourself instead of buying pre-mixed soils with the peat moss already added in it. Now that we're gaining a better understanding of soil mixes and what goes into them, let's talk about our raised bed mix. These are supposed to be specifically designed and formulated for growing in raised beds. Right here are two different raised bed mixes. We have the Harvest Organics and the Miracle Grow. So raised bed mixes are typically topsoil, compost, peat moss, and some woody species. You'll notice this one is basically just, it looks like it's almost all pine bark and wood with a little bit of peat moss. Not much compost. This one, it looks like it has more compost in it, more peat moss, and some pine bark and stuff. These are meant for, or designed to have good aeration and good drainage, which is important in a raised bed. That's why these would be better options than something like your topsoil. Although when you look at this, it's not something that I would purchase. I would much prefer building my own raised bed soil, because you can see a lot of this in here is just filler. I bet if I sifted through a lot of this, we would end up with mainly just sticks and pine bark. The other kind of bagged soil that you can get is garden soil. We have a few different kinds here. This is meant for in-ground gardens, as it says right here, in-ground soil. Right here are three kinds of garden soil. So typically garden soil is topsoil mixed with sometimes a little bit of compost, and then with some forest products like pine bark or shredded hardwood. But I mean, this, again, this Harvest Organics garden soil, this is just basically all wood. I can't believe how much woody species is in here. There's very little topsoil almost at all, it looks like. Over here, this is the Back to Roots. This definitely has more topsoil, and I can even notice some compost in here. Not bad, but really dense. And then over here is the Miracle Grow one. This is what a more typical garden soil would look like. Some compost, definitely a good amount of topsoil in here, and not too much woody species. So it's interesting even to see how this in-ground soil should be a lot different than something like the potting mix. But when I look at this Harvest Organic brand, their garden soil, which is right here, looks basically the same as their potting mix, which is right here, which to me just doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's why you really got to know what you're looking at. You got to take your hands and kind of move your hands through it to see what you're getting when you actually buy this kind of stuff, because the Harvest Organics is the cheapest, but to me it just looks like you're basically just buying essentially just pine bark and hardwood, which is super, super cheap if you buy the amendments on their own, like I showed you earlier. When it comes down to it, Choosing which soil to use is dependent upon a number of things, like whether or not you're growing in a container or a raised bed or in the ground, and whether or not you want to buy a pre-made soil or mix one yourself. But laying out all these different kinds of soil, I hope gives you a good idea of what you're buying when you pay for it. Like here's their premium topsoil, the Scott's. It's got some compost and stuff mixed into it. Next to us here is a topsoil, the Garden Pro. Looks like it's mainly sand, a little clay, and a lot of sticks. The Harvest Organics, this raised bed mix, it's very similar to the other Harvest Organics potting mix and the other Harvest Organics garden soil. They're just a lot of sticks and a lot of filler, in my opinion. Over here we have the Miracle Grow raised bed soil. This one doesn't look too bad. It's got a decent amount of pine in it and stuff, but this is what I would expect for a raised bed mix. Over here is the Miracle Grow Performance potting mix. This actually looks nice. I think it's a good looking potting mix. It's relatively expensive because when it comes down to it, your potting mixes are going to be more expensive because they have more peat moss in them. Over here we have the Back to Roots potting mix. This one doesn't look that great in my opinion. It looks more like should be a raised bed soil, and it's probably a little cheaper than the Performance Organics one, but I don't think this is one I would use. We already talked about this one, the Harvest Organics. I wouldn't touch that. This is the Sta Green potting mix. This one looks like a lot of woody species, and I know it's not organic, and I definitely wouldn't use this one. Right here is the Miracle Grow regular potting mix. This one looks pretty good too. It's not organic, so I wouldn't use it, but it has a good amount of peat moss, not too many big pine bark or sticks, so it looks like it'd be a good option. Right here is my all-time favorite potting mix. You can't get this one at Lowe's, but it's definitely my favorite. This is the Happy Frog. I'll swear by this stuff. It works really well. You can see not a lot of bark, not a lot of shredded hardwood. It has a lot of great additives to it besides just peat moss too. Really nice stuff. Over here we have the Back to Roots in-ground soil. This one looks pretty decent actually. I think this is better quality than their potting mix, which is kind of confusing to me. But the in-ground soil's got a good amount of compost, some topsoil, pretty dense though. This is the Harvest Organics again, basically just sticks. Look at this, I can't believe they're selling this as in-ground soil. It's terrible, I think. This one right here is the Miracle Grow in-ground soil. Again, pretty good looking stuff. Looks quality to me. Next to us here, this is the Black Cow compost. This has a lot of wood in it, more than I expected. The in-ground soil from the Miracle Grow looks more like compost and looks like it has more compost in it than the Black Cow compost, which is surprising. This is the Garden Pro compost and manure. This looks like it has a lot of sand in it and a lot of sticks and not a lot of compost. So I wouldn't use that one probably. And next to me here, this is my own homemade soil. This is the best you could get, I think, in my opinion. I make this with cocoa coir, so it's got better texture. And in the future, I'm going to go into a detailed video of how I make my own potting mix and how I make my own soil. Because making your own soil, in my opinion, is the best bang for the buck if you could kind of get larger quantities of it. And it's something that isn't super hard. That's what one of the ideas with this video was, to kind of open up the understanding of what you're getting when you pay for a soil and what they're all composed of, because a lot of soils are similar. They're composed of the same just major ingredients, just at different ratios. So you got to know what you're paying for if you're going to put out the money. The potting mixes are all relatively the same price, surprisingly. Like even the Happy Frog soil, that one's a little more expensive, I think, than the rest, but it's an organic one, just like the organic Miracle Grow one. This one isn't cheap either, but it's a pretty good option. It's better than I thought it was going to be. There's one thing I want to mention about bagged soil that's super important, and it's that you want to make sure that your bagged soil isn't waterlogged when you buy it. So this one right here isn't waterlogged. These are the same size bags. It's not that heavy. This one over here is super waterlogged. You try to pick it up, it's just so insanely heavy. Waterlogged soil in bags is not good at all, because when you have soil that's waterlogged, then it lacks oxygen, and the soil in there can go anaerobic, which means without oxygen, and that will really hurt your plant's roots, because the roots of plants need oxygen to breathe. So make sure when you're getting your bagged soil that you don't buy one that's just waterlogged, or you're going to be wasting your money. That's today's video, growers. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you got something out of it. Me and Tuck, he's still out here. Check him over here. We hope that we brought you some value, and we hope that we equipped you with some knowledge that you could use next time you go to the big box store and get some soil, or wherever you're getting your soil. And even if you don't want to make your own soil, we hope we gave you some ideas, like if you're going to use topsoil, to add some peat moss or coco coir to lighten that up a bit. Overall, I'm shocked at some of the results, and I hope that we're saving you money and you don't go out and waste your money buying a soil like this. Even though it's cheaper than some of the others, looks like you're getting, in my opinion, is sticks and bark. Me and Tuck wanted to mention before we let you go, a thank you to one of our channel members, Barbara Gwynn. Thanks for being a part of Team Grow. Thanks for having your hand in everything we're doing out here. Tuck and James will be back to you again real soon. We